Okay, this is the intro for the podcast.
Why, hello there. Welcome back to the Silver Screen Fiends podcast. I'm your host, Sam. This week I am alone, and I figured I would do another edition of Silver Screen Shorts. Now, I'm going to talk about a little movie called Party Monster. It is a movie based on the Club Kids movement in the 80s and 90s, but more specifically, Club Kid leader Michael Alig. Reason I am doing this is because I recently found out that he passed away in December of last year due to an accidental heroin overdose. I'm going to preface this entire episode by saying I do not condone the actions of what he did, and I do not respect him as a person. And I will get into why I had to disclaim this. Anyway, so before I get into the actual movie, I'll give you a very brief background of who the Club Kids were. It was basically a group of kids way back in the day, in the 80s and the 90s, and they took over New York as this flamboyant, rebellious group of people who just want to be free and do whatever they want. And they would frequently take drugs. They would party until 5, 6, 7, 8 in the morning. And they were kind of known as the influencers, quote unquote, in that time. And there was a lot of personalities and characters that existed in this era. It includes James St. James, Julie Jules, Ernie Glam, DJ Keoki. Even RuPaul was a part of the movement for a little while. And then we have the ringleader, Michael Alig. So Michael Alig was somebody who was born in Indiana, bullied, came to New York, seeking something bigger and better for his life. And that's kind of where the beginning of Party Monster takes place. And Party Monster is a biopic that stars Macaulay Culkin as Michael Alig, Seth Green as James St. James, his frenemy, and a whole nother cast of people. It's actually pretty interesting that there's some pretty big names here. There's Chloe Sevigny, who plays Gitsy, his girlfriend, later in the movie. Natasha Lyonne makes a cameo as aspiring Club Kid Brooke. You even have Wilmer Valderrama as Michael Alig's love interest, DJ Keoki. So, this movie is based on the life and times of Michael Alig back in the 80s and 90s, but more specifically focuses on the rise and fall, and more specifically the murder of another fellow Club Kid, Angel Melendez. And this is based on a true story. Michael Alig and his fellow drug dealer / junkie friend Freeze murdered Angel Melendez. And there were a lot of rumors about how he carried it out, but Party Monster seems to be the closest thing to a visualization we get. So anyway, and also this movie is based on a book that James St. James wrote back then called Disco Bloodbath. And Michael has gone on record saying, half of this shit isn't true, blah, blah, blah. But, he was thrown in prison for a while. He was released in 2014, but I'll get into that a little bit later. So, film opens up, like I said, with Michael Alig. He's just a small town outcast. He's getting bullied, lives with his mom. He has a very close relationship with his mom. There's no father figure. He moves to New York. He discovers this potential, this untapped nightlife that he wants to get into. Sure, there was always a party scene in New York, but he thought that he could bring something unique to it. So then enters James St. James, played by Seth Green, who, and I will say, Macaulay Culkin did a pretty good job portraying Michael. But if you look at comparison shots of archival footage from when James St. James was younger versus how Seth Green portrays him in the movie, it's pretty scarily spot on. And speaking of archival footage, one other thing that's cool to note is, so this movie came out in 2003, and there was a shockumentary, quote unquote, that came out in 98 called Party Monster, the Shockumentary. And it details the same events, but it's not a biopic. It's just a straightforward documentary. So anyway, back to the movie. So they meet and they enter this donut shop, and Michael immediately takes to James, because James, I don't think he was super established yet in the New York nightlife, but he was somewhat known. People were talking about him. So Michael knew that to get anywhere, you had to have connections. So he keeps pestering him to teach him how to be fabulous, how he could run clubs, and how to be like a fabulous star. So he gives him all these tips, some ridiculous, some helpful. And this is where you start to see their dynamic and their chemistry really shine through. And it's interesting because from here on out, the movie plays like the most textbook definition of a black comedy I've ever seen. And that's kind of difficult to explain unless you watch it. But anyway, so James tells him, listen, I'll teach you how to do all this, but I don't really think you're cut out for this. And he decides to give Michael a warning about like not trying to do his own club stuff. And then this is when Michael discovers the Limelight, which was a very, very popular night spot in New York. And it was owned and operated by Peter Gasham, who is still around today. I think he's in his 70s. But he owned a bunch of clubs back in the day, like Club USA, the Limelight, Palladium, etc. And he was big back in the day. I know that there are some lawsuits and controversies surrounding him. I don't know what the status of that would be. But anyway, so Michael hooks up with the local club owner, Peter Gasham. They start talking. Michael says, no, trust me. Give me a chance. I promise you'll love me. I'll bring in people. So he gives him a chance. And obviously at first, Michael sucks at it. He doesn't know what he's doing. Nobody shows up. The only person that's at his first party is Christina Superstar, which was another club kid who actually did die in real life, I'm pretty sure, and is played by Marilyn Manson, funny enough. So James St. James sees that he goes through with this party. He's like, Michael, there's no way you can continue doing this. You can't even organize a glass of water. And Michael decides to set off the fire alarm, or the fire prevention rather, and break the nozzle that lets water all over the dance floor. And this is when you start to see that Michael does not take no for an answer. Something as silly as that. But that's kind of where it starts really taking a turn for the worst. So because Alig was so eccentric and such a character, people started taking notice, and his tiny little group blossomed into this phenomenon. And the Limelight became the hottest club in New York. And I remember even talking to my father about this back in the day, because he showed me Party Monster years and years ago. Probably like 15 years ago. And Limelight was huge. It was huge. People flocked to it. You had stars going in it. You had Andy Warhol always frequented it. You had Madonna's been there. You had all the club kids. And it was just one of those things where You'd have to be there to understand the impact it had. And so Alig ends up being named the king of the club kids, so to speak. And then the rest of the movie really starts to decline because it's just him on this drug-fueled rampage. And he finds his boyfriend, Kiyoki, randomly at a club, coaxes him into a relationship, and recruits him as somebody of the inner circle and dubs him a DJ. And to this day, Kiyoki still DJs, I'm pretty sure. So there's a scene where Michael invites Geishin over for a holiday dinner. And Peter gets to the point. He says, your parties break even. You don't generate any income. I'm losing money on you. I'm giving drinks to your friends for free. And Michael's just persistent. He's not listening to me. He's like, no, it'll be bigger. It'll be better. I promise. We'll keep it going. And you can see that James St. James starts hitting on Kiyoki in the other room. And James is giving Kiyoki tips on how to be a good DJ. But you can tell he's flirting with him. And Michael breaks out some champagne while they're in the other room. And he fills up all the other glasses. But for James's glass, he fills it just with urine. And it's while he's talking with Peter. And I always found that scene to be hysterical. And this is where Michael starts really turning into drugs, because he starts to notice the effect it has on the people around him. And it kind of just, it has this synergy with nightlife. And so there's a scene where it's Michael's birthday and Kiyoki comes and, you know, he's skiing a little bit or he's high on whatever. Michael takes notice, gets mad at him. Kiyoki storms out. So Michael, in a fit of desperation and anger, decides to do all of Kiyoki's cocaine, along with the cat that they found in the dumpster the night they first hooked up. And then, you know, this is really where shit goes off the rails. Because Michael's now just descending further and further into drug abuse, and him and his crew were doing everything and anything. They were drinking, they were doing coke, they were doing ecstasy. You know, ecstasy was always the big one that they were known for. And I've seen clips of when they appeared on talk shows like Phil Donahue and Geraldo and whatever. And a frequent question would be, what is the drug use like? What drugs do you do? I heard that you gave X to your mother once. And this is all true. And I do like the way they mirror that in the movie, because there is a talk show segment. And this is where you can really see the tension rise between James and Michael, because they are frenemies, very much so. You know, one always believes they're better than the other, and it's this constant race to the top of being glamorous and being the most respected. And in that scene, John Stamos plays a fictional talk show host, and he's questioning all of them about their lives, and Michael keeps stepping in and blaming James for shit and whatever, and you can just see that there's this ridiculous tension. So then you find out that Michael murders Angel. But before that happens, there is something interesting I did want to discuss. They are, so at this point in the movie, this is sort of like the climax of his life, because he is at the top. He is known. They go on talk shows constantly. They're known around the country. They are an unstoppable, rebellious force in New York nightlife. One day they go to Dallas because they went on this cross-country trip to recruit other club kids. And this is where you meet Brooke and Gitsy. And they go to this club in Dallas, and they're sitting around in the back waiting to go on stage. And Brooks starts making them a drug salad, saying, I saw you guys on the TV. I wanted to be just like you. And then Gitsy comes over, sits on Michael's lap, and says, you should be my girlfriend. And this allure of the club kids is what drove them to want the spotlight. And they get told they have a couple minutes till showtime, but they don't have a show because they don't do anything. And that's the thing that I kind of wanted to stress here, is that there was such a phenomenon for doing absolutely nothing. And I think that's like such a satirical statement on how we view celebrity status. Like, think about how many people you know that don't really do anything per se, but are just known. It's actually kind of crazy to think about, and it's been that way for a while. So it was just interesting to see that in this movie. So then they get on stage and start doing this song, which is actually kind of catchy, if I'm being completely honest. I might throw a clip in it if I want. But then we move on to the dark shit where him and Freeze murder Angel, and this starts to get fucked up because James has this vision. He basically, it's kind of implied he overdoses, but it seems like a bad dream, where he's talking to this giant rat and they're looking through this little mouse hole on the ground, and you can see Michael stealing drugs that were hidden in a boot in a closet. Angel comes in wanting money for all the free shit because Michael obviously didn't pay for anything and he was used to just getting his way all the time. And they had a bunch of people in this apartment. No one was really paying rent. Shit was getting crazy. So Angel decided, nah, I need money now for this stuff, because I can only imagine how much he was wasting. And this is when you start to see the events unravel. It doesn't get too gratuitous. They show a lot of cutaway shots of Angel getting hit with a hammer, then getting thrown on the ground, and then they show him throwing him in a tub, and they inject him with bleach, which apparently is false. And bleach is meant to slow down the decomposition of the human body, but that's not actually what happened in real life, according to Michael. Although, who really knows? And then they chopped up his body and threw him in the ocean. And then the body washed up. And that's how he was discovered. And so some other things happen in the movie, but now I'll kind of turn it to real life. So once that happens, Michael, so from what I've seen based on interviews and archival footage and the documentary, it seems like Michael at first wanted to tell people, because you got to remember, he's very narcissistic. At heart, he's a narcissist. And that's his biggest problem, maybe even above drugs. And he wanted people to know he did it, but in a joking kind of way. He always was about shocking people. With every party he did, that was kind of the whole point. He would always do parties that would push the levels of comfort in patrons and club goers. And he even did one called Disco Bloodbath, which is exactly what the name of the book is, which the movie is based on. He had James on a stretcher, and they had raw liver and all this blood on him, and flies are gathering. They've had people in the club drinking pee. It was just, it got so fucking outrageous. I mean, it is very much worth looking into from an anthropology standpoint, I think. So Michael tells people about this, and then once people start catching on to it, he's like, oh no, it wasn't me. And this was really fast-tracked by Michael Musto, who, I'm not certain if he was a club kid himself, but he was involved in the scene back then. and he was a reporter and a journalist, and he always had the scoop on the club kids because he was involved in those circles. So he kind of played both sides in that regard. And that's kind of when things ramped up from, oh yeah, I totally killed Angel, to, oh no, I didn't kill Angel, to, yeah, no, I guess I did kill Angel. And then that's when he eventually gets convicted. So he pleads guilty to first-degree manslaughter, and Alig. So Freeze was sent. I forget how long he was in prison for. I think he was released in 2010. So about 13 years, and then Michael was released 2014. Yeah, I think he was eligible before that, but he fucked up. Anyway, so he gets released in 2014. And I remember finding out about this. And I was super fascinated with this whole story. And I remember reaching out to Michael on Twitter. And we kind of had a few back and forths. He gave me his email. He was like, oh my God, come out to this party I'm hosting. I think it was at the Outreach Club in New York. And I was just like, it's so interesting to me because he was not a good person. But something about all these events that transpired just kind of like drew me in a weird way. He then starts a YouTube show called The Pew with fellow club kidder Ernie Glam. And he was another sort of big name back then. And, I found this whole thing very interesting because obviously Michael wanted to make a comeback. And he wanted to use Party Monster as the platform to do so. But there's still the glaring fact that he's a murderer. Doesn't really matter how you slice it. And you could tell that, well, he was first forced to be sober because he was on probation for quite a while and he had to go to anger management classes and all that. And that was for, I think, a couple years. But as that time goes on, you start to see him making the same mistakes. He gets arrested in a park at like 2 a.m. He's got some stuff on him. Then he was caught smoking crystal meth at one point. And at one point he became homeless and he was using Grindr to just hook up with people and sleep on their couches for the night. And he even spent a night under a bridge. And he was just really in a bad spot. And I wouldn't say I watched the show religiously, but I would tune in every now and again just to have some background noise and the listener, Ernie, be very passive aggressive towards Michael. So then in about 2020, I would say like mid 2020, he goes radio silent. And not much is heard from him. He was originally working and living at this art factory or art. I don't even know what you would call it. He called it an art factory. He worked at this warehouse in New Jersey. And eventually he gets kicked out. They had multiple misunderstandings. And so it was just this endless spiral of shit. And then that's when, on Christmas Eve last year, he dies of an accidental heroin overdose, and he was 54 years old. And this is one of those things where it's hard to be sad for him because I'm not sympathetic to the things he did, but it is depressing because he could have turned his life around. And you see success stories like that. Look at Steve-O. That dude's life was insane. And he had to hit rock bottom multiple times to get to where he is today. And now he's a health advocate. He's been sober for many years. He's about positivity. He's putting all of his energy into projects and YouTube and a new Jackass movie and all this good stuff. And Michael just didn't want to work. He didn't want to put in that work to get to where he was, because he got lucky and rose to prominence in 80s and 90s New York. He thought he was going to ride that wave post-release from prison, but as soon as he murdered Angel, the club kid scene completely died. And sure, there's still nightlife in New York, but obviously there was nowhere near what it was back then. And also in COVID times, there wasn't much of an audience for him. He had his niche clique, and that's kind of like where it ended. And so, yeah, it is sad in a sense, because you wanted him to do better, but then you still think about how much of a piece of shit he was, and he murdered, and Angel Melendez's family still probably deals with that pain on a daily basis. And it's just such a crazy story. I highly recommend everyone check out the Disco Bloodbath book and watch Party Monster, because Party Monster is actually surprisingly a pretty good movie. And even though sometimes it is dramatized, obviously for the sake of being a biopic, it is pretty true to the story it is telling. And I think I wouldn't say it's a must watch, but I would say it's worth it for anyone who's either interested in a good biopic or they're interested in learning more about the club kids from back then. And it really was such a powerful movement that it's crazy that it just doesn't really even exist anymore. It was just a little blip in time. I wouldn't say Party Monster is a 5-star movie, but I do like it. I essentially grew up with it. It's just crazy to see that we went from a story that from afar seemed so interesting and crazy to a harrowing reality where the main focus of that story was dead, and now all the stories are dead along with him. That's really it for the episode. Like I said, it was more of a retrospective, not much of a review, because this is going to be one of the few times I say just watch it if you want to really see what it is about, because nothing I say is going to explain the obscurity, the hilarity, the sadness, and the darkness of Party Monster. This has been Sam with the Silver Screen Fiends podcast on another edition of Silver Screen Shorts, and I hope you enjoyed. If not, I'm sorry. We will be back soon. We got some guests coming up. I'm excited about that. Might have another giveaway soon. Anyway, hope you all have a good day, good evening, good morning, whatever damn time you are listening or not listening. Okay, goodbye.
In the age in which the pursuit of all